My name is Dory Wilson. I am a Black American living in Belgium. I am an independent researcher, writer, and cultural curator here, and I also work as an assistant in the European Commission.
My name is Jean-Luc Dugodjera. I define myself as a Brussels Rwandan. I am a teacher. I teach French and Dutch. I am also a writer. I live in Brussels. It's been a couple of years. Yeah, it's probably the city that connects me the best with the rest of the world. If I want some African food, if I want some Africanity, then I will know where to find it.
I'm Maudine Tamboué. I'm an expert in human rights and gender and development. I also collaborate as journalist chronicler in a radio show. I arrived here as a young child with my parents. It's really the city I live in. I love it.
There is no real Black community in Brussels.
There's no real Black community in Brussels. What is a real community?
Yeah, the adjective real is...
Yeah.
Wow. Hey. But let's talk about your thoughts on it. I mean, you obviously, you're kind of like pulling back on it. So let's see what is it that's like kind of shocking, offensive, sort of.
I think that there are communities, Black communities in Brussels, and
what would that be? Who would that be?
Depending on when they arrived, depending on where they come from, if they're coming from Africa or even from the US, Jamaica, if they come from different parts of Europe, because it's also you have really, it's so diverse. It's so multicultural, actually, because you have the Ghanaian community, you have the Nigerian community. They go either by nationality, either by colonial languages, French, English, or Dutch. So, yeah, maybe it's so diverse that some people may think that there is not one community, because
But you were really disturbed by this idea of real,
because it goes with the politics of the Belgian society that doesn't still today recognize the African communities are part of the civil society.
Voila. Okay.
And it's really, again, making real, questioning the realness or the existence of it comes from the fact that of the ignorance of it.
Jean-Luc, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think I was indeed also a little bit disturbed because of the assumption.
I felt that.
Yeah. First of all, what is real? What does that mean? And then the plurality of the Black community. What is it, a Black community? And then what is Black again? And who's defining us? Who would have such assumption? What's the implication behind? But somehow I do agree there is no real Black community, because the whole thing, the whole sentence for me doesn't really, well, when you say real, it's just the authenticity. So that's mean basically how we are defined, because we are very often, that's the problem. Very often we are defined by other people than us or the Black or the Africans. We're very often defined by the white majority. And in their very narrative, exotic way regarding the other. So we exist through their lenses. It can be very problematic to have to explain ourselves, okay, what is real? Oh, are we real? And then, of course, the Black community, well, Africa and the diaspora, we're so many, we're so different, we're so plural. So what do you mean by African community? So it would be very, I don't know how, I don't even know where I would start.
I agree. I think that it's a very problematic statement because it's not taking on, again, the complexities of the diaspora, or what Bonnie Greer calls meta-Africa, you know, this kind of, not just the kind of geographical, but also the cultural exchanges and, you know, connectivities that exist without the awareness of dominant culture. I mean, one of the things that was profound for me as a Black American being in Belgium and looking at, you know, Leopold and the Congo was that, in fact, it was a Black American explorer who went to the Congo Free State, and actually he had met Leopold II just before he was going to Congo. His name was George Washington Williams, and he was the one who actually notified the authorities of the atrocities that were happening in Congo. And when I read that, it was like, oh wow, but these are my people too, because I mean, I was, you know, I'm from that man who like actually alerted the world to what was happening to the Congolese population in the 19th century. So it created a new connectivity for me to the Congolese community in Belgium that I never had before, and I only found it out because I was doing research following this murder of George Floyd. So Black America does have a relationship with the Congolese community, even though in a lot of ways people would say that the conversation is generally like too foregrounded by Black America when we talk about the Black community or Blackness or whatever. I mean, the sort of the community that dominant culture often references, and that's why the language is very much like this.
The diaspora is the pioneer for me, when in terms of defining of the Blackness and the race aspect, because it's through slavery and where the concept indeed was crystallized, I would say, and people in the Americas and in the Caribbean and even Latin America, where basically where they have been displaced. It's something that inhabits them and that somehow defined them and also constructed them. But in Africa, indeed, we're not definitely defined by, when you are in Africa, we're not defined by our race. We'll maybe define our ethnicity over our languages. So we discovered that when we arrived in Europe. I discovered that I was Black when I arrived in Europe. So that means I was 10.
Yeah. Exactly. And exactly what you bring. I mean, as a community, we're not defining ourselves as Black or Noir. We define ourselves as coming from Congo. I'm coming from Kasai, Lomami, RDC, and I relate to the others as being Songhai or Igbo or Wolof, and not Black. So per se, there's no Black community or communauté noire. There's only African community. And I think, yes, we are organizing communities, but related to either the doctors, the teachers, by your the work that you do, or your belief.
Right, but that's also that's an internal conversation. That's the interior conversation. So you're defining all those aspects. I mean, and all your communities, you're saying, you know, we sort of arrange and organize ourselves based on things that we value. You know, that's the kind of problematic of the dominant being, you know, because the orientation is white-centered. So then the conversation is different. And it becomes more narrow, which is what Jean-Luc was saying before, is that the conversation becomes much more narrow because of the limited access and exchange and interaction of dominant culture. I mean, and dominant members of dominant culture. I mean, it's like, again, this kind of definition, it's incomplete. It's incomplete.
Strongly biased.
It's a global struggle based on the fact that, you know, racism has the ability to change and redefine itself and modify itself based on environment and conditions and social structures and so on.
Okay.
Mix up.
Mix up.
Mix up.
Okay. Well, there aren't a lot though. The sans-papier movement is forgotten in considerations of Black Brussels.
I would disagree.
Yes.
Quite heavily, because I know quite a few Black people that are heavily involved in the sans-papier movement here.
Yes. Yes. Who says that? Whomever needs to be involved in the question of sans-papier is involved. They are involved. Certainly the Black community. We desperately want, of course, to bring that question more, the migration issue more on the forefront. That's different. The citizen doesn't always want that either.
But no, I mean, and they work hard against it. I mean, in fact,
exactly.
there was a lot of what I remember. I mean, in the last few years, it's been heavily tied to the union movement, and there's been a lot of pushback around making that connection, so that the visibility was initially started in that, but then let's say the union movement was less prepared to follow it through. So a lot of people who were initially supported in that were not after a certain point. And it's also very problematic. I mean, it's a very problematic aspect of Europe at the moment.
It would be hard even saying that it's a big business. Huh? The migration issue is a big business, and I think having the African community, or at least the sub-Saharan and the African diaspora, more involved in that question does not fit some streams, I would say, elegantly. Does not fit some streams, and because, of course, this would mean budgeting of a better budgeting of what we want, especially when the sans-papiers have demands that are too specific, let's say. And that's where I feel and I sense it, that we have African diaspora wanting to be more involved, get some barriers in front of us
to get rid of
to
some
get
barriers,
to get linked to the people undocumented. Because for me, nobody's sans-papier, but they do not have the residency recognized here, while all those people are not sans-papier. They have documents from their countries of origin, and these are not recognized and not given papers here.
Right.
That's also
That's
a whole
point of clarification.
Yeah, that's a whole point of clarification, because it also gives respect to the people, because they're not apatrides.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, a sans-papier is a apatride.
Yeah.
Then it's a whole other set of discussion, and it places people in other positions with the administration, and it will give another perspective, I think. And do we really want? Does the system really want to see that?
You know, for let's say 2/3 of the time that I've been here, I've just seen a significant drop in people of African descent being able to get residency or citizenship in Belgium. And so the people that I know that have been in that situation, many of them have either gone to the UK before Brexit or France. And the process has actually been more, it is more clear, more streamlined. I mean, I knew a woman who's now in Paris, who was in Belgium for 13 years, Congolese, trying to get residency in Belgium. And she went to France, and in 2 years she had citizenship and residency. So it's just like there seems to be a structural problem that's making it also very difficult for the communities to actually gain residency and citizenship. I mean, it's a conscious structural element. It goes back to sort of the historical and maintaining a sort of precarity or vulnerability of communities of African descent that are the ones that are being barred from having access to the Belgian landscape, which I think is also...
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, it was a very interesting statement that was made, whether they feel forgotten or they are forgotten. It is quite sensitive for me because I arrived here as a sans-papier, as a refugee. When I was 10, I was just mentioned that in the question before. And right after it, I think it was not... During the same time we heard about, the story came out of Semira Adamo. And I remember it was just shocking because I could project myself, because what happened to her could have very much have happened to me. And to see that she was alone, because I arrived, I mean, part of my family was here already, also seeking asylum. So I remember I went through a lot of struggle, and so if sans-papier would, or undocumented, would say that in the movement that is being created, the different movements that are being created in the black movements that are being created, that they would feel, or they feel forgotten, it would hurt me very much, because to hear that, because it would just mean that we've missed the mark, we've missed something. And but I do also believe that in the different protests that, let's say, the process I was able to go to, the name came quite oftenly of Semira Adamo. So, and it was, it made me feel somehow a little bit warm inside.
Yeah, validated.
Yeah, and validated. Because I just thought, yeah, her name didn't go indeed forgotten.
Yeah.
But did we do enough, or are they visible enough? Do they feel represented? I think it's not a question I can answer, but it would be very sad if they didn't.
So I understand, I may understand that also, because at some point, anybody who came here for the last 50 years, at some point has been with no valid residency permit. And one thing also, once you get your paper, I've been told by some people that once you get your residency, you just want to forget this hard time. And that's why some of the African community don't want to go again back there, because it's like reopening the wounds that they have. And how do we keep on as a community being supportive for those coming today and still needed to fix their life or their administrative life without reopening the wounds? That's also maybe something we should look at. We know how it works today. Each country has its shares of migrants to incorporate or to document and welcome. It goes also with some money that is allocated by Europe for that. Of course, there are organizations that are also in the stream of making sure that people settled, and there we are faced to a problem that becomes more budgeting, and some countries are threatening of not doing so if they don't get paid more to take more people and assist more people. Should we go to the next?
Yes, please.
Gentrification is killing black communities in Brussels.
Well, that's very interesting.
Matonge.
Well, I mean, it's ironic because, of course, Matonge is not a black neighborhood.
No.
The first things that I was taught when I came to Belgium, because I came here to do a master's degree in European urban cultures. So we did this, walking tour of Brussels and came into Matonge. And of course, the first thing that came to my mind was a place like Chateau d'Eau or Goutte d'Or in Paris. And then it became clear to me and, through my instructors that in fact, Matonge is an environment where people come to buy things, but they don't live in that community. And in actuality, one, it's a very expensive neighborhood.
Yeah.
But two, the neighborhood, in fact, was the administrative seat of the Congo in the period of, in the colonial period. So it would be like the equivalent of the commission, but for the colonial power. And then basically no black people live in the neighborhood, or very few. So those communities are not members in the way that people assume. Like, people always assume if I, want, I don't know, products or food or whatever, that because I'm black, that I would go to Matonge.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, have you been there? Do you know what's there?
Yeah.
To even assume that that would be the place that I would go to retrieve food or, buy food or whatever. Yeah. But the other side is that, that the community that actually was in this Excel bordering 1,000 was basically torn down to allow for the European institutions. So where many of the areas where African residents lived in proximity to Matonge were torn down to allow for the European institutions.
Yes, and the thing is that, in fact, gentrification is not killing the black community. As you say, Matonge was the first economic place where small enterprises, shops, could install themselves of African. Was the place where students would come. So of course there were no owners.
Right.
They were just
Renters.
renters. There's no such area where we could say, oh, here, like, Rue Wayé for the Turkish community, or Rue de Brabant for the Moroccan communities, are owning, or some areas in Molenbeek, in Laken, where they own
and the
properties.
Visible.
So, I mean, gentrification and African or black community, yes, it's not killing them, it's not just not enabling them even to live, because before there were very few African owning properties. Today there might be some, but where they can buy, certainly not in gentrified neighborhood, because the pricing is so high that this is what is killing multiculturality.
Yeah,
because it's not only the black community, it's all the migrant community. Some of the migrant communities, the ones that are more precarious or having less higher revenue or less access to bank supports for ownerships, that will not be there. That will not go there because renting becomes expensive and buying even more.
Yeah.
So that's the issue with the gentrification for us. I think it's more that it sets a new layer of exclusion to property and ownership.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of strange indeed when they say gentrification is killing, when you just like you said, black communities never really owned the Matonge. So, well, then the gentrification definition would just completely collapse.
Exactly.
And it is true, because even every time since even I'm an adolescent, I will go there with my mom and my sister just to do their hair and to buy African products. But you just go, you buy, or for a service, a particular service,
Exactly.
then you go. I never visited an African person in Matonge who lived there, actually.
Exactly.
And even if they did, they will be in small apartment in very precarious conditions.
Yeah.
So somehow, yeah, it would be very. Their living condition will be not healthy, I would say.
Yeah, not ideal.
But on the other hand, it is very funny, because when we live in Brussels, and when we are African, people expect us.
Yes, exactly. That's how little they know about the neighborhood.
To be from
too.
Matonge, to be and I remember when I was I've worked a couple of months in Zaventem, which is the periphery of Brussels, in a Dutch school. When I'm a teacher. Originally, I'm a teacher, and people would expect me to come from Matonge, or they would ask me, "Oh, how is it in Matonge?" And I was like, "But what do you mean?"
Yeah.
Because it's a very,
it's
like a very, again, we always have to define ourselves, but always through a particular lens that already somehow has already been defined and framed, and we have to fit in.
Exactly.
And then when you explain that I do not live in Matonge, I do not live in Ixelles, because Ixelles is actually one of the priciest, one of the most expensive places in Brussels. We cannot really, even a younger person cannot afford an apartment or a studio there. And so we just go there to buy stuff, and then we go back home. They would very much puzzled.
Yeah, because this is the propaganda that's sent out. But it's also a kind of containment, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have a community whose presence demands a redefinition of Belgium. And so one of the ways you control it is you contain it and you say it only lives here.
Yeah.
Right, that's the place. While to turn it in a positive way, for me, the gentrification has forced the shop owners to go in other areas in Brussels, which is good.
Okay, so you mean they diversify more?
Yeah, they diversify more because like Brussels Center also has now some shops. You have some African shop in Molenbeek, in Gare du Midi. Really sort of spread. Some are owning their own
their spaces.
They rent at better price, and so they reinvented it. It enables people to also have those shops closer to their place and not only have to go to one only designated place for them.
Like black people are everywhere. We're everywhere. You cannot say one neighborhood is more or less. There may be more services in particular geographies, but the reality is
it does start in Brussels, indeed, because that's where the most connections are. I mean, when a refugee or when an immigrant arrive, then you know that you're going to have, but it's not in Elsen, it's not in Matonge.
No.
It's Anessens, Gare du Midi, very peripheral. I think we are still African people with African descent and who has one foot in Africa and the other in Europe. From my experience, it was very hard to be myself in Zaventem, that's the place where I had the last job experience. In Brussels, it depends of the neighborhood. But there are, as I said, there are always exits or places where you can escape as a black person, not only as a black person, but also as a queer person, as someone who has a lot of multiple identities. And so I think it's a place where I feel like I can negotiate all those identities.
Last one.
This is the last one?
Yes. Gonna read it.
Okay.
The establishment of the Lumumba Square mutes any more efforts of decolonization. Brussels is still a deeply colonial city. Boom.
I mean, the Lumumba Square does not mean that the conversation of decolonization isn't still happening. It very
It's
much
finished.
is.
No, it opens it. I mean,
Yeah, but there it's saying that it's closing it.
Yeah, we don't close a conversation just by putting a name.
And
on
also,
a
I mean,
square.
it's so invisible. I mean, I'm sorry, but we don't have anything remotely reflective of the kind of space taking that these colonial monuments have. I mean, the Lumumba Square is so micro that people can't even recognize where it is. I mean, I know where it is because I know the people that were involved in it. I mean, Maudie, you were, Mireille, Robert. I mean, a number of people were involved in it, and I saw the event that really kind of culminated or, you know, sort of defined the presence of the square. But in fact, the problematic is that it sat at the access point and the entrance point of a metro station. So you can't actually clearly see it. It's not defined. It's not a square as we think of a square. It's not like Saint Boniface or Meus or
No,
things
for
like
no
that. And that's why it's problematic. It's just like, you know, it's a space that's still, it's multifunctional, right? It's
Yeah.
not dedicated. And that's why it's problematic. That's why it's not for me. I mean, I'm happy that it's there, but I find it really, how would I put this? You know, just, it says to me how terrified the actual clear definition of a Lumumba Square, how terrified the country is to actually place that name on a designated area that people would come people would be present in. And so you kind of work the edges and, you know, we say we've done, but I'm sorry, it's just, I don't understand well, I do and I don't, but I have a real problem with the fact that the country still has such a problem when in fact Lumumba so heavily defines the country.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. It's no way out. You know, you can say what you want, but there is, as a child in America, like I was born in 1963, and when I was a child, I was told about the murder of Lumumba. And children of my generation, there are still Patrices,
Yeah, but
and that's from that.
That's from there. Yeah, that's true.
So it's really, to me, so, because it's in my iteration of it as a Black American child, it was the most profound political event in my early childhood. So I am actually offended that people are offended to make a square. Like, what is that? That's like, I'm in Brussels, I see Martin Luther King Square everywhere. In Anderlecht, there are like the cités, and there's Martin Luther King, and there's, you know, Malcolm X or whatever. And somehow Lumumba is like, you know,
Doesn't make sense.
it's over the top. Maudie, I'm sorry, I'm way out.
No.
Please talk to me about this. I feel you.
No, but it's because there's so many things going on in my head with that.
Where to start?
Where to start? Because yes, Brussels is still a deeply colonial city, and I think it will always be. But and the thing with the square, the little square, it's also where our demands are often trapped with political agendas.
Voila. Okay.
Because everything about Lumumba, we have to understand that there's everything for us as a Congolese, it's a patriotic thing.
Yes.
It's a liberation thing.
Yes.
And for the geopolitical era, it's all about systemic structural domination.
That's right.
You see?
Yeah.
And we are caught into those 2D thing. There's more to the square being so tiny and this little place, and there's more than just the decolonization debate that goes beyond history. It's about economic power today. It's today is the today Congolese political agenda and how this country will get out of this erratic wars, this economic faillissement, fight, because failure, the
corruption.
The corruption, not only because for me the corruption is a small thing, and the corruption doesn't help for the country to be better. We should stop focusing on the corruption because it's a whole system.
Yeah, okay. But I actually feel like when I say that I'm more, maybe it's not clear, but that I'm focusing more on the undermining from the global north.
Yeah.
Of the economic and structural
exactly.
problematics in the country, that it's not just, you know, there's this kind of like throwaway phrase like corruption, but you know, there's like in-baked aspects of the corruption that makes it virtually impossible for the population to be removed from it, because it's the machine that moves the economy and the social fabric and the civil society and everything.
Exactly, and there's this Brussels is still a deeply colonial city. Yes, it's about what are we talking about when we say that?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's
Do
big,
we
it's
talk
too broad, right?
only about public spaces? Because for me, it's also a city where people live.
Absolutely.
People live together, and it's the coloniality of everyday interaction that you may have at the shops when you go in a print machine, and if you ask for some question, you found out that the one providing you the service, or the client will throw on your face, "Oh, we're not in Africa here." Huh?
Voila.
That's very colonial.
That's right.
Yeah, this is what it brings
again,
to
it's
me.
like Jean-Luc talking about the assumptions that are made, and the implication is the lens that is being viewed through. I mean, the thing that I always find, I mean, this is like my you know, my behavior. Go ahead.
No, I mean, for whom are they actually making the square? Is it for the Congolese population, or is it for the Belgian? Who needs to be educated on that matter? Because obviously Congolese people do know Lumumba and his legacy. Even just you also said, when you go to the United States, people talk about Lumumba. I've been in the United States. Yeah, I've been in the United States several times, and they do speak about Lumumba. They know him, what he has done. You go in the Caribbean, in Haiti, that I also visited. They also talk about Lumumba. Then, just to mention two examples that are very, they speak for themselves. I taught again back in Zaventem. I taught about, because I teach French, I was teaching Francophonie. And then the first country Francophone in the world, it's Congo, Kinshasa. And backlash. From my hierarchy. And the students, of course, but then it went up to the hierarchy. They would say, yeah, but why are you teaching Congo in the French class?
Well, y'all got the receipts. Like, I didn't write it. Like the fact of the matter.
I didn't produce.
Right?
I'm not responsible for the fact that Congo is the first Francophone country in terms of speakers.
It's statistics. Yeah. But this is always the thing, right?
But it doesn't, and people don't even know Lumumba. So I was teaching about Francophonie and the history of the Congo.
Presence, how did it happen?
Students are 16. They don't know Lumumba. No. We are in Belgium.
Right.
You don't know Lumumba.
No, but that's
you
conscious.
do know Louis XIV, etc., and
Yeah, but they know
maybe
Martin
George
Luther King.
Washington. But Lumumba, you do
But
not know him.
that's all
How do you
very
explain that?
conscious
I
and
have to
calculated.
justify myself. And they have to remove that from the curriculum. It's like, no, it's too complicated for them. Why don't you just stick back to the French, you know,
Well,
culture,
then
francophonie?
talk to me about, I mean, what is it then if we can actually establish, because they're your receipts, they ain't my receipts.
Look, my contract was not renewed a couple of months later, so I lost my job. You know, I mean, this is real. So this is that's how it happens here. So I'm still wondering, what does the square? It's nice, Lumumba, but what does it mean for whom?
Yeah.
For whom?
Yeah, that's right.
You see, this is why.
But it's like you said about the political.
Yes, this is why I always say decolonization. Today, I feel, I sense, maybe I'm wrong, that it's about history class. Wow. Well, no, it's not about only history class. It's math, French class, science class. Yeah. It's every bit of the aspect of education when we come to education. And it's very important for us to be aware of this and comprehend that, because it goes with the system. Exactly. The system is the state and the government, and we have to really be as communities and as a specialist or whatever, be involved in all its aspects and not be distracted by just one element that is thrown or is given emphasis to. Yeah. Because we might miss the intersectionality of the whole story.
Exactly, but I think that what Jean-Luc, I mean, the example that you give, for me is really, I'm sure, honey, we ain't got time for that, right? But the thing about it, and this is the thing that is, it talks so much about how the whole conversation is cast generally or presented generally, is that somehow people of African descent are like illegible, unreadable, not included, not an aspect, but in reality, all of the major markers within the society cannot be separated from a Black presence. Yeah. So then when you start to talk about Francophonie, Francophonie ain't about you. Francophonie was Enlightenment creation here in Europe, but you're talking about what is the result, what is the manifestation of Francophonie. And this is the point that where I always say, you know, Black people are always the faulty witness. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You're the faulty witness. There's something wrong, even though there is nothing about what you said that has anything to do with you except to be reporting on the history of an aspect of cultural reality. So this is the thing that is like earth-shattering for dominant societies, is that the story starts to become complete.
Last example about you. You say you did your master at the VUB. Mm-hmm. Same thing. Mm. Well, it's not necessarily related to Lumumba, of course, but the moment I brought up my subject because I wanted to talk about Brussels, Black Muslim community actually, in Brussels. Again, disturbing. A few months later, my contract was not renewed. They decided not to renew it because somehow, if a Black person decide to talk about the legacy of the history of the presence of Black people, they feel like they're losing control.
Yes, well, they are.
The system is losing control, and they are afraid. So the only thing they want us to do is just window dressing.
Exactly.
So the VUB somehow decided, it's like, well, it's nice, but very uncomfortable.
Yeah, but these are uncomfortable conversations. I mean, it's uncomfortable for me or you or Modi to be asked to not discuss the fullness of who we are. I mean, this is also problematic. We spend a lot of our time living in an environment that is constantly erasing the presence of us wherever we are.
This is why I think things are changing, and thank you for this period that we're living since last year, because I think today it's for us to focus still on being recognized in front of us, but also to declaring, to have really an affirmative posture.
Yes.
Than that might be defined as revolutionary, radical, or impertinent, but really have an affirmation and declarative posture where we say, this is how we view things and this is how we want things to be done. Knowing that we are in a geopolitical structural system that doesn't work in our favor, but we need to have that ground from ourselves and work on how we are going to manage to make history and tell the history and live it, and not be lived through the lens of someone who says, this is the history that we want you to comply with. And the risk by doing that is, yes, of course, we'll be failed, we'll be thanked, we won't have some access or lose jobs, but then it's also for us to create those space, the media reality, and create those jobs and have our people really have an agenda where we go into the system and make sure that we secure ourselves.
I'm happy you concluded with that. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And I totally agree, because
And also, you know, like Audre Lorde says, your silence will not save you.
No, I mean, we try to not to make waves, we try to fit in, we try to assimilate. I mean, we tried it all, actually.
Of course.
Yeah, we've tried it all, but then somehow it always end up being a problem. But now I do realize that actually I am a problem by default, even before I start doing whatever I start to do. I am a problem. But I'm like, you know what? Okay, let's just go.
But it doesn't matter then.
Push it further.
And that's why we need to round up and saying we're not the problem, we're the solution. There's no problem, actually. We're the solution.
This colonial system will rule the underprivileged.